Welcome to Relish Books. Today I'm talking about A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. This is the first Ibsen play that I've read. I've been meaning to read his work for a while. A Doll's House is a title that I'm very familiar with, but I didn't know anything about the story of it. It's a play in 3 acts, but it was interesting. I don't know if it's just this edition. The way that it reads is there's no scene changes that are marked or that you really feel, but rather the 3 acts happen in chunks. But the story is, I think it partly appealed to me because I really like these very dramatic and very emotional stories, but that are on a domestic level. The whole thing happens within this home. Really, I don't even know if you ever see more than 1 or 2 rooms. It kind of happens all in the same room. There's just a handful of characters, and the whole thing relies on this relationship between a husband and wife that's built all on false pretenses. Like, they don't really realize this, but the whole time they are play acting with each other. Neither of them truly knows or understands each other, and so they can't really love each other the way that they should. That's kind of the whole play, but what I really, really liked about it and what was so interesting was the perspective shifts. Because when you start out in the story, you're seeing things through the eyes of Nora, the wife, and at first, you kind of think, you see things the way that she does. And then you're seeing things also, like, from the way that her husband treats her. You quickly form this opinion of, like, who she is. You know, he treats her in a very, he's, like, kind with her and playful with her, but he treats her in a very belittling way. He clearly doesn't think of her as an equal or even really as an adult. He treats her very much as just this silly, lightheaded, like, frivolous person. But the thing that is so frustrating in a sense is that this is the way he sees her, but he sees her this way partly because of just his ideology, but also because this is the only way that she ever acts with him. She only ever acts like this very lighthearted, merry, frivolous woman who kind of lives up to all the stereotypes that he expects. So this is all he ever sees of her. She never tries to get him to see her any differently. So this feeds his expectations. For 8 years, they've lived this way. So yes, he's at fault, and this is all he expects from her. And so that's wrong of him, but at the same time, that's all she's led him to expect. She's only ever encouraged that view in him. And she doesn't want to let him see any of the deeper parts of her. She doesn't want to let him, she has the pivotal thing about the story is she has this secret from him, this dark secret that she doesn't dare share with him. Not because she thinks he would react badly, but because she doesn't want to have him sacrifice for her, because she believes his nature is so noble. And because that's what she believes, that's kind of what you believe. Like, you very quickly see the cracks in their relationship. You very quickly see that he is a very proud, selfish person, and his being so in love with her, seeming to be so in love with her, is largely just to feed his own pride and ego. And you see that, and you're like, okay, you think you see this, and she doesn't. And yet at the same time, you still believe in her image of him because she fully believes in it. And you don't. It doesn't really occur to you to think differently. So I just love the way that you that these things shift. Again, there's this vicious cycle of him expecting her to act a certain way, and so she does, and so that's what he expects, on and on. And so for the early parts of the story, you think, oh, he's selfish in some ways, but he really thinks this is who she is, but he genuinely loves her. And so for the first like 2 acts, my whole longing, if you're familiar with the story at all, my whole longing was for her to just tell him her secret. For her, I just was so sure that that the problem in the story was her dishonesty, was her not being open to him. Even though he would have to change some of his ideas about her, I was so sure that everything would be fine if she would just be open with him, because, the foundation of marriage is communication, and that's something that they don't have. And so I was like, well, they truly love each other if she would just communicate to him, if she would just be open, everything would be fine. They would be able to fix everything. Even if it's difficult, everything would be okay. And she was wrong about how she thought he would react. Like, she's like, I can't tell him. I can't do that. I can't do that. And I was so frustrated with her. I was like, you have to. I was thinking, I was thinking everything would just be fine if she would just be open with him. But the way that things come about startled me so much. Because, again, I was seeing things from her perspective. And she's a really interesting character because everyone's thinking that she's so flighty and she doesn't have, that she's not intelligent and she doesn't have worldly experience. Everyone is thinking these things. And to a certain extent, they're true. She does have a simple spirit, so to speak. She believes in love, and she believes in ideals with a certain kind of innocence that is part of her upbringing, because her father was the same sort of man as her husband and only ever had these very childish expectations of her. Never thought that she could have experience. They always talk to her like, oh, you're so silly, you don't have any experience, but they never expect her to gain anything. They never do anything that promotes her gaining any. So in one sense, they're completely wrong about her and they don't understand her at all. But in this other sense, she genuinely doesn't have worldly experience. She is living in the idea, she's living in this doll's house, so to speak, where everything is just play acting, but she believes in it. And then eventually, when her vision is kind of shattered and she realizes that none of this is really true or really the way that it should be, she's left with nothing. She realizes that she doesn't have any experience. She always thought that she knew more than they thought she did, and then she realizes that she doesn't know anything because the things that she thought she knew, she didn't know. So it's this complicated thing, but I love the perspective shifts and kind of this twist at the end because to me it felt so real. To some people this might not feel super real, that this woman who has sacrificed so much for her husband, it's in her, she believes in true love and she believes in it like in a novel. And so she thinks, and so her ideals are actually far more pure and true than his, which is part of what the story is illustrating. But her perspective shift felt completely real to me. Some people might think it's kind of unrealistic that she would go from one moment being absolutely willing to sacrifice everything for her husband. Like, she's going to, because she thinks it's necessary, she's going to kill herself to save his honor, because she thinks that he would sacrifice his honor for her and she won't let him do that. So she has in the past sacrificed so much for him completely selflessly because she never let him know it. And she's willing to go and give her life for him, so to speak. She goes from that to having this one exchange when she sees how he actually reacts to knowing everything about her. Or not knowing everything about her, but knowing what she did. When she sees his reaction to that, the way that her perspective shifts, the way that she changes and her eyes are open and the way she views things, it felt so real. Because one moment she's ready to go and sacrifice herself, and the next moment she's like, this is a spoiler, she's like, I have to leave you because we're complete strangers. We don't know anything about each other. And that can seem so dramatic, but to me it felt completely authentic. I'm not commenting on the right or wrong of any of this. It felt completely real. Because since I was on the same page as her, even though I was believing about her husband the same way she did, even though I could see flaws in him that she didn't see, because of her belief, I was believing in him too. And so when he reacts the way that he does to this news, and you realize that his love for her was, as she said something like, "You don't love me, you only found it pleasant to be in love with me." And you realize that all of his love for her is really just love for himself, and having this beautiful woman was just a source of pride and enjoyment for him. And when you see the shock to you as you realize these things, because I felt like I was realizing all these things about him with her, and my reactions to that, the way that my mind changed, tracked exactly with her reactions. Maybe not everybody would feel the same way, but for me, my responses, my natural response to the way he was acting was exactly the way that she reacted. The way that her tone changes, the way that she goes from being so passionate and emotional to being cold and drawn together. It was exactly the way that I felt. I felt like my disillusionment was happening right alongside of hers. And so that was really neat to kind of experience this exactly as the author wants you to. That's always a special experience in a book, and also to be so closely tracking with a character, because so often we have to kind of imagine how we would react in these situations and try to understand differences of personalities, and that maybe we wouldn't react that way, but we can understand that this character would. But I was exactly on the same page as her. Again, I don't know if I would have reacted in every way the way that she did. Partly because, I have very different experiences and very different beliefs and stuff than she does. But in that moment, her reaction was just absolutely authentic. Her complete turnaround through this one real moment of seeing who this man truly is. This complete turnaround, it felt real to me. It didn't feel overly dramatic. It didn't feel unrealistic. It felt completely real. I was right there with her. I was feeling the things that she was feeling to a certain extent. And so that was really neat. So yeah. And also it was so surprising. That's not all the way that I thought the play was going to end, which also gave it interest and part of its art, I guess. The only character that I felt was kind of out of place, just to comment on kind of the rest of the story, I felt like the doctor's character was a little out of place. Maybe he was just kind of put in to add a little bit more dimension to the story because the cast is so very small. But I felt like he was kind of unnecessary. I felt that plot line was a little weird. Didn't really have a place. It connected a little bit, that she's planning to kill herself, but, he's about to die, and he, says something about she wishes him a good night's sleep, and then he says thank you because he understands what she's saying, and then she asks him to wish it to her in return, and we understand that this is a reference that she's gonna kill herself. But other than that, I didn't feel like his character really gave anything to the story. I did really like the character of Mrs. Lind, because even though she's hardly in it, you don't know a lot about her. You don't even get her past explained with the lawyer very much. But it's you have just enough. You know just enough of their past. Nothing's over explained. You don't need more. And I felt like it was a really interesting kind of twist how, at the beginning of the story, she comes in, she talks about being a widow, having had no love, no children, and Nora is very sorry for her, and she's like, I am so happy. I have this wonderful husband. I have these wonderful children. And then the contrast switches as Mrs. Lind comes to be a wife, to have someone to care for, to have children to care for, and Nora loses all of that. So I felt like her character worked in very well and was important, but yeah. So, like I said, I felt like the emotions and the perspectives of the story were so well done and felt so real to me. When I say that they feel real, though, they feel real in essence, in what's happening, in the way that the characters are reacting. They are definitely caricatures in some ways. This is a play, and the husband especially doesn't feel terribly realistic in his dialogue. He's very much a caricature and a stereotype. He's very overdone. All the things that he's saying, I feel like, are supposed to be, he's a caricature of a type. He's a caricature of this type of man and husband. And so all the things that he's saying, I feel like for the purposes of the play, he's articulating a lot of what would normally just be the subconscious thoughts of this type of man. When he talks about her helpless state of femininity and like his masculine state, and like protecting her under his wings, and how he's going to care for her. She doesn't know anything and she needs to like completely rely on him. He's very overdone. But again, I think he's a caricature. He's putting into words all these subconscious beliefs that are attributed to men like this. A type of man that I think people think is a lot more common than they actually are. I think that's kind of an overdone stereotype, but within the story, obviously, it works very well. So he does feel unrealistic. Some of his speeches, you're like, no man would actually be saying all of this. But I think, like I said, I think it's supposed to be the types of subconscious thoughts and beliefs and ideas that this type of man is supposed to have, that he's putting into words for the sake of the play. So, I don't know. It all worked just fine for me. Yeah. So, I really enjoyed it. I read it really quick. It was very stressful. It was very stressful and interesting because the whole time you're thinking, like, I thought it was going to be tragic probably. And I was reading towards it thinking that things were probably going to be resolved, but it would be too late and she would have killed herself anyway, and all these kinds of things. And so the end, again, was such a surprise and such a mind changer. And then the ending was just totally different from anything that I thought that it was going to be. So I really enjoyed that, the unexpectedness of it and the very real quality that it seemed to have, even when it is such an exaggerated example of people. But I think that it was a very well done example for what it was. So those are my thoughts. I was kind of just putting these thoughts together after just finishing the story this morning. Putting these thoughts together about this. There's probably a lot more that I wanted to say, but I probably already talked too much. So those are my thoughts on A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.